It's video that shocked the nation. A 6-year-old forced to run on a treadmill at high speeds. The little boy keeps falling off and his dad keeps ordering him back on. He falls hard 6 times. 12 days later, prosecutors say Corey Micciolo died from chronic abuse.
Cases like this rarely begin with violence. They begin with warnings that are dismissed. Long before the events of April 2, 2021, there were signs that something was wrong in the life of 6-year-old Corey Micciolo. Changes that were subtle at first, a shift in behavior, fear where there had once been ease, silence where there had once been trust, but none of it was enough to stop what came next. Corey Micciolo was born in 2014 in New Jersey. To those around him, he was a bright, curious child, energetic, imaginative, and affectionate. He loved drawing, playing with toy cars, and listening to bedtime stories. At the playground, he made friends easily. At home, he was deeply attached to his mother. Brianna Micciolo, Corey's mother, devoted herself entirely to her son. From the moment he was born, she assumed full responsibility for his care and emotional well-being. She described Corey as her happiness, her center, the reason everything else mattered. Corey's father, Christopher Greger, was present in his life, but from the beginning displayed a rigid and controlling temperament. Brianna noticed early signs of harshness, discipline that crossed into intimidation, authority that felt more like domination. While these behaviors unsettled her, she worked to shield Corey from conflict and maintain a sense of normalcy. For several years, that fragile balance held. Everything changed in 2019, when Brianna and Christopher officially divorced. The separation was contentious, with custody quickly becoming the central issue. Brianna argued that Christopher was not emotionally fit to care for their son. She raised concerns about his temperament and methods of discipline. The court did not agree. In 2020, a decision was made to grant joint custody, allowing Christopher regular visitation. For Brianna, the ruling felt like a betrayal. She believed the court saw only a composed, functional adult, while ignoring the behavior she had witnessed behind closed doors. Not long after visitation began, Corey Micciolo started to change. Brianna noticed her son becoming quieter. He withdrew from activities he once loved. His energy faded. He smiled less. His anxiety became visible, especially before visits with his father. Eventually, Corey spoke. He told his mother that he was afraid of his father. He described being yelled at, called bad, and punished for small mistakes. He spoke about being forced to do things he didn't understand or didn't want to do. "I'm tired," he told her once. "Dad says I have to be strong." For a 6-year-old child, these words carried weight far beyond discipline. Soon after, Brianna began noticing bruises on Corey's body. At first, she tried to rationalize them as normal childhood injuries. But a pattern emerged. The marks appeared more frequently after time spent with Christopher. Concern turned into alarm. Brianna contacted social services, reporting her observations and her son's statements. She explained the behavioral changes, the fear, the unexplained injuries. The response was consistent and dismissive. There was insufficient evidence. Christopher, according to records, had no documented history of violence. Without that, agencies claimed they had no grounds to intervene. His behavior was interpreted as strict parenting rather than abuse. Brianna did not stop. She continued to report concerns. She documented incidents. She asked for help. Each time the outcome was the same: no action. Corey remained in his father's care. As months passed, the situation deteriorated further. Corey became increasingly withdrawn. He avoided talking about his time at his father's house. When he did speak, it was with visible fear. On one occasion, he told his mother that his father made him do push-ups as punishment. "He says I have to be strong," Corey repeated quietly. Brianna recognized the warning signs. Physical punishment was escalating. Psychological pressure was mounting. She reached out again to social services, emphasizing that her son was afraid, that he was being disciplined in ways inappropriate for his age. Again, she was told the same thing. The punishments described could fall within the boundaries of strict parenting. With nowhere else to turn, Brianna contacted the police. She reported visible injuries on Corey's arms and legs. Officers spoke with Christopher, who denied harming his son and attributed the bruises to active play. The investigation went no further. Without corroborating evidence, no charges were filed. No protective measures were put in place. The court order remained unchanged. Brianna felt the walls closing in. The systems designed to protect her child, family court, social services, law enforcement, had all failed to act. Corey Micciolo continued to be sent back into an environment he feared. Still, she refused to give up. Brianna began keeping a detailed journal. She wrote down Corey's words. She noted dates, behaviors, injuries, emotional shifts. Every entry was an attempt to build the proof the system demanded. She believed that if she documented enough, someone would eventually listen. She never imagined how little time she had left. As time passed, the warning signs became impossible to ignore, but instead of triggering protection, they were met with hesitation, deflection, and silence. For Brianna Micciolo, there was nothing left to do but watch helplessly as her 6-year-old son slowly changed before her eyes. The child she once knew, open, joyful, full of curiosity, was fading, and every attempt to intervene was met with the same response. There wasn't enough proof. The court's decision to enforce joint custody became a point of no return. By March 2021, the situation had reached a critical stage in the life of Corey Micciolo, a stage that, in hindsight, presented multiple opportunities to prevent what was coming. Opportunities that were missed. One of the most disturbing incidents occurred on March 20th, 2021 at a local gym. Christopher Gregor was known to frequent the gym, often describing himself as disciplined and fitness-oriented. On that day, however, he brought his 6-year-old son with him. What followed would later become a key piece of evidence. Witnesses inside the gym noticed something was wrong almost immediately. Corey was placed on a treadmill and forced to run. Despite the child's visible exhaustion, Christopher demanded he continue. Corey complained. He begged to stop. His small body struggled to keep pace. Christopher did not relent. According to eyewitnesses, he raised his voice, ordering the boy to keep running. "You need to be strong. Stop being weak," he reportedly said. Surveillance footage later confirmed what witnesses described. Corey Micciolo, visibly distressed, struggling on the treadmill while his father stood nearby, watching. Several gym patrons grew uncomfortable. One staff member approached Christopher and suggested the child needed rest. The response was dismissive. "This is my son," Christopher said. "I'll raise him how I want." After the incident, at least one witness contacted social services to report what they had seen. The response was familiar. "We'll look into it." Nothing happened. When Brianna learned about the incident, she was outraged. She contacted police and child protective services once again, this time armed with surveillance footage and eyewitness accounts. Still, no immediate action was taken. The incident left a visible mark on Corey. He became quieter, more fearful. He complained of pain in his legs. He told his mother he didn't want to see his father anymore. "I'm scared," he said. "Please don't make me go." Brianna submitted the gym footage to authorities, hoping this time it would be enough. It wasn't. Once again, she was told the evidence did not meet the threshold for intervention. The treadmill incident became yet another missed chance, one that, had it been taken seriously, might have saved a child's life. As March gave way to April, the situation continued to deteriorate. On April 1st, 2021, the day before Corey's death, Brianna insisted on taking her son to see a doctor. She noticed he was unusually tired, withdrawn, and complained of stomach and leg pain. She believed his health worsened after every visit with his father. During the examination, the pediatrician noted bruises on Corey's arms and legs. According to Brianna, No detailed questions were asked about the origin of those injuries. The medical report referenced general exhaustion and bruising, but no further action was taken. For Brianna, this was devastating. She was convinced the injuries were not accidental. But once again, her concerns were documented and then dismissed. The system remained unmoved. The next morning, April 2nd, 2021, Corey was scheduled to spend the day with his father, in accordance with the custody order. Brianna later recalled that her son cried that morning. He begged not to go. "I'm scared, Mom. Please don't leave me there." It was the last thing he would ever say to her. That evening, Brianna received the call that would destroy her life. Corey Micciolo was dead. Christopher Gregor reported that his son had suffered a tragic accident inside his home. According to his account, Corey became ill while playing and fell from a height. He claimed he called for emergency help immediately, but investigators quickly noticed inconsistencies. There were no signs at the scene consistent with a fall, and the medical examination told a very different story. The autopsy revealed multiple injuries: broken ribs, internal trauma, and extensive damage inconsistent with an accidental fall. In addition, older bruises were found across Corey's body, evidence of prior abuse. For Brianna, this was not just confirmation of her fears, it was proof. She publicly stated that Corey's death was not an accident, but the result of prolonged abuse. "I tried to save him," she said later. "I told everyone. I begged for help. No one listened." Forensic experts concluded that Corey died from severe internal injuries caused by blunt force trauma. The findings shifted the case from a tragic accident to a criminal investigation. Christopher Gregor avoided the media. He limited communication with authorities. He maintained his innocence. But the evidence was mounting. Corey Micciolo's death forced the community, and the system itself, to confront a devastating question. How many warnings does it take before a child is protected? The investigation that followed would be long, complex, and deeply painful. But it would ultimately lead to the arrest of Corey's father, and expose the catastrophic failures that allowed this tragedy to happen. The forensic examination of Corey Micciolo's body would become one of the most critical turning points in the case. Medical experts documented extensive internal injuries, including ruptured organs and multiple fractured ribs. The report made one conclusion unmistakably clear: the injuries were not consistent with a simple fall. Even more disturbing was what the exam revealed beyond the fatal trauma. Older injuries were found across Corey's body, bruises and marks in various stages of healing. According to forensic specialists, many of these injuries had been inflicted long before the day Corey died, pointing to a pattern of repeated physical abuse rather than a single accidental incident. When investigators received the autopsy results, the direction of the case shifted decisively. Police began assembling evidence to determine responsibility for Corey's death. A central figure in that process was Brianna Micciolo, Corey's mother. She detailed her long-standing concerns, the behavioral changes she had observed in her son, and her repeated attempts to seek help from social services, attempts that had gone unanswered. Brianna handed over her personal diary, where she had carefully documented each troubling incident: her son's words, visible bruises, emotional distress, and the fear he expressed before visits with his father. She also submitted the gym surveillance footage, showing Christopher Gregor forcing Corey to run on a treadmill despite visible exhaustion. The footage became a crucial piece of evidence, demonstrating not just harsh discipline, but behavior experts later described as abusive. As the investigation expanded, authorities uncovered additional alarming details. Records showed that multiple complaints involving Christopher Gregor had been filed with Child Protective Services in the year leading up to Corey's death. None resulted in meaningful intervention. Investigators also identified witnesses who described Christopher as aggressive and controlling toward his son. One neighbor reported hearing loud screaming from Gregor's home. Others recalled seeing Corey withdrawn, frightened, and frequently bruised. Nearly a full year was spent gathering medical evidence, interviewing witnesses, and reviewing official records. In March 2022, police issued an arrest warrant for Christopher Gregor.
Anything? Weapons?
No weapons.
No knives or anything?
No, sir.
You plugged in?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, if you want to just take all of his property that he's got in his possession and we'll take it from you.
Left hand back with me.
That's off on anything.
I think that's house heater.
Yes.
House heater, something.
He was taken into custody and questioned. Gregor denied all wrongdoing, insisting that he had never harmed his son and that Corey's death was a tragic accident. But by that point, the evidence told a different story. Prosecutors charged Gregor with multiple offenses, including child abuse, causing bodily injury resulting in death, and failure to fulfill parental responsibilities. The court denied bail, citing concerns that his release could pose a danger. For Brianna Micciolo, the arrest brought a sense of movement, but not peace. "I tried to protect him," she later said. "I told everyone Corey was in danger. No one listened. This should never have happened." She hoped her son's case would expose the consequences of ignoring warning signs and force the system to listen when parents raise alarms. The trial of Christopher Gregor began in 2024, 3 years after Corey Micciolo's death. The case drew national attention, becoming a symbol of systemic failure and missed opportunities to protect a child. The prosecution presented a comprehensive case built on several pillars: medical testimony confirming Corey's injuries could not have resulted from an accident, surveillance footage showing Gregor forcing the child to exercise despite distress, witness accounts describing aggressive and controlling behavior. Brianna's diary and recordings documenting Corey's fear and repeated signs of abuse. During the hearings, one gym employee testified about witnessing Gregor yelling at Corey while the boy begged to stop running. "It was cruel," the witness said. "The child was exhausted, and his father ignored him." Neighbors also testified, describing screams, fear, and bruises they had observed. The emotional peak of the trial came when Brianna Micciolo took the stand. Her testimony silenced the courtroom as she described years of pleading for help, calls to social services, police reports, medical visits, all dismissed or minimized. "I warned them," she said. "I told them Corey was in danger. I did everything I could. No one wanted to listen." Recordings of Corey's voice, expressing fear of visiting his father, were played in court. They became one of the most haunting elements of the trial. The defense argued that Gregor was a strict but loving parent, insisting that discipline should not be confused with abuse. They claimed Corey's injuries could have resulted from an accident and that bruises were typical of childhood activity. But by the end of the proceedings, the question before the jury was no longer whether the system had failed. It was whether the evidence proved that Corey Micciolo's death was the result of prolonged violence. During his testimony, Christopher Gregor struggled under direct questioning from the prosecution. When asked to explain the nature and extent of the injuries found on Corey Micciolo, he failed to provide any clear or consistent answers. His explanations shifted, often contradicting both the medical evidence and his earlier statements. The trial lasted several weeks. Jurors listened to expert testimony, reviewed medical findings, watched surveillance footage, and heard from witnesses who had observed Corey's fear and Christopher's aggression. By the time closing arguments were delivered, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Christopher Gregor was found guilty of child abuse and causing bodily injury resulting in the death of Corey Micciolo. The courtroom reacted instantly. Applause broke out, quickly followed by tears. Brianna Micciolo collapsed into her seat, overwhelmed by emotion. It was a moment of accountability, but not relief. Justice had arrived too late to save her son. In August 2024, Christopher Gregor appeared in court for sentencing. The judge addressed him directly, delivering words that echoed through the silent courtroom. "You abused your position as a parent. You turned what should have been love and protection into pain and fear. You failed your son in the most irreversible way. Christopher Gregor was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 20 years, for child abuse and intentional infliction of injuries leading to death. Brianna was present as the sentence was read. Tears streamed down her face, not from victory, but from grief. "This won't bring my son back," she later told reporters, "but at least he can never hurt another child."
Again, you can use your initials, your full name.
Brianna Micciolo.
Thank you. Please have a seat.
Your Honor, my name is Brianna Micciolo, and I appear before you today not only as a grieving mother, but also an advocate for justice. On behalf of my son Corey, I stand here before you to plead for justice that Corey rightfully deserves, and to press for the maximum sentence of Christopher Gregor, whose actions have inflicted irreparable harm in our lives. For you to fully understand the gravity of the situation, I will flash back to the July of 2013. This day marks the beginning of a traumatic journey defined by manipulation, abuse, and ultimately an unspeakable loss. At 16, I first met the defendant, who was 21 at the time. He proceeded to feed me drugs, alcohol, and took complete advantage of me, which led to the conception of Corey. From day one of my pregnancy, I knew I would keep Corey, regardless of the way he was conceived. Corey didn't ask to be brought into this world, and I knew I owed it to him to bring him into this world with unconditional love. Corey was and still is my life, my world, and my everything. I would also like to speak about my past, which I am not 100% proud of. You heard a lot about it throughout the trial, and so did a lot of the world. It was very upsetting for that to come out because I've worked extremely hard for many years to be where I am today. I admit I abused drugs, but during the trial it was made out that for some reason my son deserved to be killed because his mom was a drug addict. That is absolutely disgusting. I stand here today, clean and sober, and I know Corey would be so proud of me. Unfortunately, my son is no longer here to tell his story, so I'm here to be his voice and tell his story along with all the others sitting in the gallery who have continued to stand by me. Not once have you seen the defendant shed a tear for Corey in the last 3.5 years since he killed him, and today was fake. I don't believe a word he said, and I don't accept any apologies. He has no remorse for any of the actions he committed, and his only remorse, like you saw today, was for himself because he got caught and convicted. Another reason I could think of is, everything he had done to Corey was done out of spite towards me. Another reason I could think of is he's sick in the head and used Corey as his punching bag. On April 2nd of 2021, it was not the first time that he abused Corey, but it was the last time. He never had an ounce of love for Corey. And to the defendant, Corey was just an inconvenience in his life. He never hugged him. He never praised him. He never told him he was proud of him or that he did a good job. He punished Corey every chance that he could get, and I cannot even begin to imagine what my son dealt with behind closed doors with this man. On April 2nd of 2021, I hesitantly dropped Corey off at the defendant's home, which is a mistake that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I kissed my son goodbye unknowingly for the last time. I wish I knew what was going to happen and I would never let him go. At 3 p.m. the same day, I received a phone call from the defendant where he stated Corey was very sick and he was taking him to the hospital, and then hung up on me after he asked for my insurance card. As an extremely concerned mother, I called him back with no answer and continued to do so along with texts for hours to find out where Corey was and what was going on. For those few hours, my mother and I called every hospital in the area with no luck. The very last hospital finally said he was there. Then there was a knock on the door. It was our local police there to tell me Corey had passed away. My healthy 6-year-old boy who was just alive and well with me a few hours ago is dead. My heart dropped and my whole body collapsed from the shock that took over my whole body. I was unable to breathe. My mind was racing, and I felt like I was no longer inside my body. All I remember is screaming that they had the wrong child because Corey was fine this morning. I actually convinced myself that it wasn't him and they had the wrong kid for a while. My next question was, where is Chris? I needed to know what happened, and he was nowhere to be found until the next day, when I found out he was in Tennessee. No one was able to tell me what happened to Corey except Corey died at the hospital. I couldn't even see my son until a week later at his funeral because his body was evidence. But the defendant took away my chance to say goodbye to Corey while he was passing away. And not once did he pick up the phone he was using to converse with many of his girlfriends, to call 911, to seek medical attention, which could have potentially saved Corey's life. Instead, he allowed Corey to suffer silently for hours. Once he realized how bad it was, he threw him in the car and then proceeded to drive 15 minutes to the hospital. He slowly walked Corey into the hospital with no sense of urgency, even when he knew how bad his condition was. I fully believe that if we took Corey to the hospital as soon as he received the lethal blow, he could still be here today. There were many steps he could have taken to save my son's life. Instead, he sat home and let Corey slowly die for hours. Every day since April 2nd has been an absolute living nightmare, and it is now the new reality for me to replay Corey's horrific death repeatedly in my head. It's the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning, and the last thing I think about before I fall asleep at night. I dread normal conversation with people, because I always get asked, how many kids do you have? I say 2, and they follow up asking how old are they. That's when the grief sinks in, and I have to tell them my 6-year-old was killed by his father. It is such an indescribable feeling when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. A sense of guilt was all I could feel. I wanted more kids, but how do I love another child? Is it fair to Corey? That is all I could think about. Now I know this is not true, and I love my daughter with all my heart, but I always will feel an emptiness, no matter how many children I have. My new reality is explaining to my daughter what happened to her big brother and why is he not here. I live in fear every day, every second of the day, that something will happen to my daughter, and I will lose her too. It's a horrible feeling, and it causes me such bad anxiety. I take her to the cemetery to see Corey every weekend, and at 1.5 years old, she knows where Corey is, buried. It is every week. It is heartbreaking. She sits and plays with the cars and toys we left there for him. I live in a nightmare, and I would never wish this feeling or how I must live on my worst enemy. Throughout everything he did to Corey, Corey still loved him. He looked up to you, and he still wanted to be, I'm sorry. And he still wanted him to be like a real father who treated him like a son. Instead of being a good role model for Corey, he decided to beat him to death. Why? Were you jealous of him? Did you hate me so much that you took it out on Corey? Were you abused as a child? Not that that's a good excuse, because you could have overcome it and became the protector he needed as a child, but instead you became a killer. There was no amount of love in his actions, and only a disturbing amount of hate. It seems like he hated Corey simply because I loved him, and he felt deprived of that love. He couldn't even control himself for long, because after the first visit with my son, he started abusing him. My son didn't even know him, and he was beating him. He was abusing him from the first time. I thank God. I hate you for not letting me say goodbye to my son, but I thank God your face is not the last one he saw. I'm sorry. What this monster did was pathetic, disgusting, and I wish him nothing but the worst. One could only hope that karma comes to him quickly. After all he's done, you would hope he'd admit what he's done, but no. Instead of grieving, I had to fight for justice for 3 long years. go to trial just to relive everything. I had to see that video that I never wanted to see. I didn't have to see it until 2 weeks before this trial. I went 3 years without seeing it. Oh, I'm sorry. Just for you to be found guilty anyway. What was the point of that? Just to make it worse for us? Are you that crazy that you convinced yourself you didn't do this? I hate you. I will never forgive you. And I'm going to skip that one. You have stolen my full potential at happiness. And I will never have my son back. My family will never feel whole again. My daughter will never get to meet her brother. And my boyfriend will never get to be the father that the defendant should have been to our son. He took my whole world away from me. He has shown and proven to be that special kind of dirtbag he claimed I was. Your Honor, all this monster had to do was say he did not want to be a father. No one would have made him. I would have happily continued to raise my son alone with the help of my family. He had many opportunities not to do this to him. He is in this current situation due to his own actions, and every day he will have to live with this. He deserves nothing less than to experience the pain, suffering, and isolation that he inflicted on Corey. I hope that every moment he spends in prison is haunted by the torment of knowing he killed my child. I fear when Christopher Gregor gets out of jail, whenever that is, he will come after my family and I again. I fear for our lives. His twisted mind truly thinks that I caused all this and that he's in jail because of me, even though he's here because he killed him. I truly believe if he ever gets out and gets the opportunity, he will kill me. Your Honor, Corey should be going into 5th grade in September, hanging out with his friends, playing sports and enjoying his life. Instead, he will never experience finding his first girlfriend, graduating high school, falling in love, driving a car, getting married, or having kids. Christopher robs him of his entire future, and Corey could have easily lived until he was 80 years old. He stole over 70 years from Corey and thousands of memories he could have made. I will never see my son again. I miss him and I love him so much. There are countless reasons Christopher deserves the maximum sentence. He rejected what I considered a generous plea deal, which shows how selfish and ignorant he is as a person. I beg you to not allow this injustice to continue, and he must face the full consequences of his actions. Thank you for allowing me to speak, Your Honor.
Thank you for your comments, ma'am. Ms. Lenta.
Your Honor, the state would move for imposition of sentence. I don't know if...
Thank you. And I acknowledge receipt of the sentencing memorandum by defense counsel, the sentencing memorandum by the state, some additional exhibits by the state, and a variety of letters, which I'll discuss in detail later. Mr. Gregor, sir, is there anything you'd like to say about yourself or your case?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please go ahead.
Just want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And Brianna, we haven't talked since Corey passed away. With everything that has been said, I just want to tell you that I'm sorry that you lost Corey. He was, to say simply, the best. I know we'll miss him for the rest of our lives. And the 2 years that I knew Corey were very difficult, but they were the greatest years of my life. And he was a happy, energetic, loving, radiant young boy who flourished in his life in all aspects the last year of his life. And sorry. That will be how I remember him. And Corey, wherever you are, I just want to say that I'm proud of you and everything that you did. The last months of his life, us three, Brianna, Corey, and me, we spent more time together than apart. All those hikes and walks, trips to the beach, time spent playing football and all the other sports, going to Sky Zone, the park, the playground, sledding. In all of that, I saw how much Brianna loved Corey, how much he loved her, and how well we could co-parent together. Those memories and all the good times, they'll be what I remember, and they helped me get through the tough days. And I hope that they can help you too, Brianna. I'm sorry you believe I could have done this to our son, and it pains me to know that you view my actions those months together as ingenuine, that I could have hurt the most important person in my life. What happened on March 20th was inexcusable. To you, Brianna, your family, and mine, I want to apologize that you had to see Corey treated that way. He never deserved it. I understand this single moment will overshadow all of the others, but it's not representative of who I am, who Corey was, and his relationship with me and him. I want to assure you that on April 2nd, I did nothing to cause Corey's passing. I didn't hurt my son. I love him and I still do. I regret not bringing him to the hospital sooner. I didn't know how sick he was. I didn't know. I just thought he was tired. And whether you believe Dr. Bodden or Dr. Andrews' version of the events, the outcome is still the same. Corey is gone. He had so much to give this world, and he still can. What we do in his memory, for his memory, things that he would want us to do, that's all we have now. To the court staff, sheriff officers, to the jury, and to you, Your Honor, thank you for being professional through this whole process. I understand you have a job to do today, Your Honor. Sentence me for the crimes I've been convicted of today. I ask that you could please consider all of the evidence presented in and out of this courtroom when making your decision today. I ask you to sentence me fairly, taking into consideration my entire life, and not just based on the 12 days. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Mr. Gallucci, anything further from the defense side? Thank you. And I'll defer to either prosecutor for the state.
Thank you, Judge. Corey was a beautiful 6-year-old whose life was taken from him, and there's nothing that I am going to be able to say that is more important than the facts that came out in this courtroom, and more important as to what the defendant did. It is difficult to think about the suffering that Corey had to endure both during his life and during his death. It is difficult to contemplate the fear that he must have lived with every single day, doing the little things in life and even doing the simple things every time that he was with his father, the defendant. Christopher Gregor abused his son. He ended his life. And then he left him alone in the hospital to die. One can only imagine what was going through Corey's mind in those last moments. One could only imagine how scared he was, how confused that he was, how truly abandoned that he felt. And there is simply no mitigation for those actions. Aggravating factor number 1 applies. The defendant's actions were cruel and depraved beyond the elements of the offense. In regard to the endangering, Your Honor, Corey didn't merely run on a treadmill and fall. He fell. The defendant bit him on the head, and he fell 5 more times. In regard to the ending of his life, Corey suffered a laceration to his heart, but those were not the only injuries. He also had a lacerated liver and a bruise to his lungs. He suffered multiple injuries. While Corey was at the apartment, he vomited, he defecated, he endured suffering. While Corey was fighting for his life, the defendant took a selfie, not even having the decency to put a shirt on Corey. While Corey's body was shutting down, the defendant ordered food. When Corey was going into cardiac arrest, the defendant was more concerned about the date that he had set up for that night. The defendant didn't call 911, he didn't call a doctor, he didn't call an ambulance, he did nothing. And this added to the suffering that that little boy had to undergo. The defendant then throws Corey in the back seat of the car where he is left all alone. When the defendant gets to the hospital, he tells the staff not to contact Corey's mother. While he's on the phone with Corey's mother, he does not tell her where Corey is. Not only did he end Corey's life, but
it is clear that the offenses in this matter involve cruelty. Cruelty to this particularly young child of tender years who was incapable of resistance. That mandates the court place heavy weight on aggravating factor 9, so it provides strong deterrent to this defendant, as well as strong deterrence to others who would commit crimes against children, particularly children of tender years such as Corey. Defendant's a big, strong individual. His family has repeatedly talked about his athletic prowess. He was not only a high school but a college football player. The pre-sentence report details his height and weight. 6'1", 220. Corey's a little boy. Was a little boy. And he deserved protection from his father, not abuse from his father. Mr. Gallucci has been a zealous advocate, and he has both in writing and orally argued for a series of mitigating factors. Mitigating factor 2 can be present when a defendant did not contemplate that his conduct would cause or threaten serious harm. While I respect defense counsel's position, everything you see on that treadmill contemplates at least the threat of serious harm. In fact, it's almost difficult to accept the medical testimony that the treadmill did not cause serious injuries. Dr. Andrew, I believe even Dr. Bodden, testified there were some abrasions, some bruising, but Corey did not sustain serious harm from that. But any reasonable, objective person watching that video would certainly say it threatened serious harm, particularly for such a small child. It would threaten serious harm for an adult to be on a treadmill and not be able to keep up, and then to try and jump back on. And I don't think the 6-year-old was jumping back on his own initiative. He was doing it because he was scared, he was being told to, and he was following his father's directives. So there's no basis to find that mitigating factor 2 exists. Mitigating factor 7 has been argued that a defendant has no prior history of delinquency or criminal activity or has led a law-abiding life for a substantial period of time. So I'm required to give some weight to that factor because the defendant has no felony level convictions in this or any other state, no indictable crimes in this or any other state. He has one ordinance violation and the one drug paraphernalia that I've just talked about. So while not perfect, it's certainly not a serious record. Despite everything that everyone has said about arrests in other states, it's a little difficult to accept that if someone's arrested multiple times in all these jurisdictions, that no prosecuting attorney chose to file charges, or if they did, they were very quickly dismissed. So the speculation that this defendant has a serious record is just unfounded. I'm confident that the prosecutor's office would have submitted to me records of convictions that they existed anywhere. I mean, there are times I get records of convictions from Puerto Rico, and it takes the prosecutor's office a great deal of time and effort to get those. So here we have a series of police reports, which I can't consider. They're mostly one-sided hearsay anyway, but I'm not permitted under the case law to consider those. So I have to recognize some weight to be given to the lack of a record. So I give it moderate weight, but as I said, the disorderly person conviction is particularly telling because of the date involved, and it's when the defendant should know better, and he should be a law-abiding citizen because he's trying to battle for custody of his child. So why engage in that drug use? And that's particularly true because the defense has, and I'm sure they felt obligated to, continue to raise Corey's mother's drug use, particularly during cross-examination at trial. So I find mitigating factor 7, but give it moderate rather than heavyweight. Defense counsel has also argued for mitigating factors 8 and 9, and they're somewhat similar. 8 would be appropriate when the defendant's conduct was a result of circumstances unlikely to recur, or the defendant's character and attitude indicate that he's unlikely to commit another offense. Those two mitigating factors, 8 and 9, are counterparts to aggravating factor 3, the risk to commit another offense. I've already found aggravating factor 3 exists, and it should be given moderate weight. Therefore, it's generally considered inappropriate to find mitigating factor 8 or 9. But regardless, those factors are not present, period, for the reasons I've indicated. I agree with the position of the state and the victims that defendant was motivated by anger, that he took advantage of someone who couldn't resist, someone of tender years, incapable of resistance. The treadmill video demonstrates Corey's fear. Someone who does that, who has that disposition, is likely to reoffend. Therefore, 8 and 9 are not present. Although not argued, mitigating factor 11 is likewise not present based upon the defendant's injuries as reported in the pre-sentence report, for the reasons I've indicated, that the sports injuries and the left ankle injury can certainly be addressed by medical staff in any correctional facility, and if not, that correctional facility would transport the defendant to a hospital to be treated. So therefore, those do not overcome or even lessen the presumption of imprisonment. Based upon all the foregoing, then, I'm clearly convinced that the aggravating factors substantially outweigh the mitigating factors. So now I need to impose sentence, and then I'll address the state's request for whether the sentence should be consecutive or concurrent. I've appreciated that everyone has asked me to impose the maximum sentence. And I appreciate the emotion that's involved, the comments, and you've heard many of the things I just said about the treadmill video and the callous behavior. Imposing the maximum sentence is just legally unsustainable by me. There's no appellate court that would say someone with only a very, very minor criminal record should get the maximum. It just doesn't happen, despite the public perception that it should happen. So on count 2, aggravated manslaughter, I sentenced the defendant to the custody of the Commissioner Department of Corrections for a term of 20 years, subject to the No Early Release Act, New Jersey Statute 2C:43-7.2, such that he has to serve 85% of that sentence before being eligible for parole. On count 1, endangering the welfare of a child, a second-degree crime, I sentenced the defendant to the custody of the Commissioner Department of Corrections for a term of 5 years. The defendant has 885 days of jail credit. So I have to address the requests for consecutive sentences. Again, there's a great deal of guidelines the court has to follow and a great deal of Supreme Court case law on this. The factors involve, first, the principle that there should be no free crimes. Secondly, whether or not the crimes and their objectives were predominantly independent of each other. Whether the crimes involved separate acts of violence or threats of violence. Whether the crimes were committed at different times or separate places, rather than being committed so closely in time and place as to indicate a single period of aberrant behavior. Whether the crimes involved multiple victims. And whether or not the sentences to be imposed are numerous, meaning multiple counts. Here we have 2 counts. With the proviso, again, that can be no double counting of aggravating factors. when there are multiple crimes involving multiple victims, the law is that the total impact of singular offenses against different victims will generally exceed the total impact on a single victim. We don't have that here. We have a single victim. But first, not to impose a consecutive sentence for the endangering would be to make that endangering offense a free crime. And one need only view the circumstances of the offense and the video to know it shouldn't be a free crime. The crimes are somewhat interrelated. They're not completely independent of each other, but they are predominantly independent of each other. Corey was subjected to an awful time on the treadmill that I've described. It was brutal to watch that treadmill video because you rarely see a child essentially inflict harm on himself in the beginning until his father starts to put him back on it. So it doesn't take a vivid imagination to consider the fear Corey's in at that point. The two incidents are approximately 12 or 13 days apart, although they both occur in Barnegat. They're at different times, and they are at separate places, although relatively close together, the gym at the complex and the defendant's apartment at the complex. But they're not so sufficiently close in time as to be a single episode of aberrant behavior. This is not someone that went and committed 4 car burglaries in a parking lot, one after another, which would be a single episode of aberrant behavior. They clearly involved separate acts of violence and or threats of violence and harm to Corey. The second act being the ultimate act, which was successful in ending his life. They don't involve multiple victims. So I conclude, for those reasons, that it would be to send a message to the public, to the defendant, and to those who abuse children, that you can get away with one offense if you get caught on the other. And that's simply inappropriate. For deterrent reasons in general, or for specific deterrence in this case. And therefore I conclude that count 1 and 2 should be consecutive. The law requires me to make an additional statement on the overall fairness of a consecutive sentence. This is a requirement imposed by our Supreme Court in State v. Torres, 246, New Jersey, at page 246, a 2021 case, where our court held that the trial judges to make an explicit statement of fairness that explains the overall fairness of the consecutive sentence. So first, I've imposed sentence on the second-degree crime at the bottom of the second-degree range. Second-degree range is 5 years to 10 years. I conclude that if I were to go greater than the bottom of the second-degree range, I would be subject to an abuse of discretion as that being excessive. Secondly, the endangering sentence is not part of the No Early Release Act. It does not contain a court-imposed period of parole and eligibility. It's referred to as a flat sentence. Additionally, I conclude that the consecutive sentence is fair because of the reasons I just articulated about no free crimes. Defendant is 32 years of age. Absent some unusual medical event for a young person, he will eventually be released to his own liberty. He will eventually be a free man to walk around. Corey, of course, will not. So this is not the functional equivalent of a life sentence, despite the imposition of a consecutive sentence. It's also fair and just, given some of the testimony by Dr. Andrew, who testified in great detail about this, got down off the witness stand, went to the large screen TV and pointed out the bruising all over Corey's body, and testified about the injuries and bruising of different ages in different levels of healing, demonstrating the doctor's concern about ongoing abuse. We had pretrial hearings about this. The state, in count 1, endangering originally alleged abuse, was occurring from December of 2020 through March of 2021 up through the date of Corey's death. I concluded that, really to protect the defendant's right to a fair trial, I concluded that many of the other incidents were attributed to normal childhood activities. Going hiking and getting a branch that comes back from a shrub into the tree, playing sports. And because there was what I found to be insufficient medical documentation or medical testimony that those incidents were attributed to abuse, I did not allow them in. But Dr. Andrew, who did not testify in that pretrial hearing but testified later, was very compelling about those levels of injury and their different states of healing. Kids get bumps and bruises. Corey had more than bumps and bruises that you would see on a 6-year-old. So for all the foregoing reasons, I conclude the imposition of a consecutive sentence is overall fair under the circumstances of this case. The state's taken an additional position that I should impose the least restrictive or flat prison sentence first, such that it precedes the more restrictive prison sentence, meaning that the defendant should serve the endangering sentence before the aggravated manslaughter sentence. There's a very difficult legal analysis associated with that. I rely upon State versus Ellis. It's a television case from 2002, 346 New Jersey Super 583. And a Supreme Court opinion in State versus Pierce, P-I-E-R-C-E, 220 New Jersey 205, and a Supreme Court decision from 2014. It is legally possible. In fact, what the Ellis case says is, while it's not illegal, it's difficult to justify. And it typically runs afoul of certain sentencing guidelines, and it may interfere with the expertise of the parole board in determining when a defendant should be released on parole. And based upon both of those decisions, I conclude that I cannot impose the least restrictive sentence first without engaging in an abuse of discretion. So therefore, I direct that the No Early Release Act sentence on the aggravated manslaughter count run first, followed by the flat sentence on the endangering count, such that the aggregate sentence is 25 years and that the jail credit of 885 days comes off the aggregate sentence. Another condition of the No Early Release Act is that defendant shall serve a 5-year period of parole supervision upon release, that he shall provide a DNA sample and pay for the cost of same. There are 2 $50 victim of crime compensation assessments, 2 $75 safe neighborhood assessments, 1 $30 law enforcement training and equipment fee. The superintending institution where defendant is incarcerated shall draw sufficient monies in an amount not to exceed 1/3 of the inmate's total income as may be required to pay these assessments. The Office of the Victim of Crime Compensation Board submitted a request for restitution for funeral expenses. There's been testimony during the course of the case about whether or not defendant's parents paid for funeral expenses, whether or not the Ms. Micciolo's family paid for them through the VCCO office. I've considered, am I supposed to hold a hearing on that? And I conclude that the parties need closure in this matter. They don't need another hearing on whether or not those expenses actually went to the funeral, or and the VCCO letters also refers to some other expenses not associated with the funeral that may not be directly attributable to defendant's conduct. If these were out-of-pocket expenses by anyone qualifying as the victim, I'd be inclined to consider them further. The Office of the Victim of Crime Compensation Board exists for the benefit of victims. It charges, the defendants are assessed, like this defendant's been assessed, 2 penalties for that, to fund that, and I conclude at this point that it's not appropriate to order that restitution because of the questions concerning who paid for the funeral, and more importantly, I would have to do an analysis of the defendant's ability to pay now or in the future. He's been incarcerated for the last 885 days. He's been unemployed. He clearly has no ability to pay now, and he has little ability to pay for the next 25 years. So I conclude, for those reasons, that mitigating factor 6 is not present There's no restitution to be paid, no ability to pay restitution, therefore I do not order restitution. If there's any bail in this matter, it's discharged. There are no dismissals. Madam Clerk, is there anything else I need to address? And Mr. Gallucci, we get his appeal rights form? All right. Anything further from counsel?
No,
All
Judge,
right.
thank you.
You, everyone, for your excellent presentations. That concludes the matter.
Thank you.
The verdict resonated far beyond the courtroom. Across New Jersey and beyond, the case sparked public outrage and reflection. Many asked the same painful question: how did the system allow this to happen? Messages of support poured in for Brianna. At the same time, criticism intensified toward child protective services and custody policies that had ignored repeated warning signs. Rather than retreat into grief, Brianna made a decision. She committed herself to ensuring that Corey's death would not be meaningless. In the months following the sentencing, Brianna began working with attorneys, activists, and lawmakers, pushing for reforms in child protection and custody oversight. "I couldn't save Corey," she said during one public event, "but I can fight so that other children are heard before it's too late." She organized memorial events in Corey's name and launched awareness campaigns addressing domestic violence and child abuse. In 2024, she formally established the Corey Micciolo Foundation, dedicated to supporting abused children, providing legal assistance to families, and educating communities on early warning signs of violence. Each year on April 2nd, the foundation hosts remembrance and advocacy events across New Jersey, bringing together social workers, lawmakers, and families affected by similar tragedies. Corey's case also forced institutional reflection. Following public scrutiny, New Jersey initiated reviews of child protective procedures. New training programs were introduced to help social workers identify patterns of abuse earlier, particularly in contentious custody cases. Legislative discussions began on strengthening the weight given to parental warnings in family court decisions. Still, Brianna remains clear-eyed. "The system is still broken," she says, "and until it's fixed, this can happen again." Years have passed since Corey Micciolo's death, but his story has not faded. His name is now referenced in advocacy efforts, policy discussions, and professional training programs. His brief life became a catalyst for change. Corey was a 6-year-old boy who loved to play, to learn, and to feel safe. His life was cut tragically short, but his legacy continues to protect others. "I live so his death is not in vain," Brianna says. "That's the only way I can keep going." The case of Corey Micciolo stands as a stark reminder. Ignoring warning signs costs lives. Listening can save them. And as long as his story is told, Corey will not be forgotten.